will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down, but holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3. Here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good! And it's Marler with a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Hunter Burns.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Another live edition here of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. Anthony Pagnotta, Josh Marlowe here with you. And it's time to get you ready for the Tar Heels' 4th game of the season as they look to go to 4-0 for the first time since 1997. They'll give it another try on Saturday night. This time on the road against the Pitt Panthers. They have some things that they have to get ironed out when it comes to I guess people refer to them as curses. I don't know if you would refer to Pittsburgh as a curse. They've lost 2 games there. I don't know if that's quite curse-worthy, but it's still a hump that Carolina has to be able to get over. Also, they are bringing out a uniform combination that has many people very paranoid as well. So a bunch of different things that go into a game against a Pitt team that a lot of people don't look at as nearly the threat as they have in the past. Do we still, do we think that's legitimate? Do we think that Pittsburgh is a team that Carolina still needs to be very concerned about? We'll tell you about that here on this edition of the podcast. Josh Marlowe, of course, back with me. And it seems like, Bud, every time that we play Pittsburgh at this point, they've had a couple of matchups later in the season, but just about every time it's right around your birthday, including one of the highlights that we had coming in, the only one that involves Pitt, that win on the catch by Bug Howard in a game that actually took place on your birthday. So we're right around that time. I know that you're excited. Carolina playing tomorrow night. Sunday, you'll be able to hang out with your family and enjoy some things. I know tonight you were hanging out with your family and everything like that. So how excited are you for the birthday weekend and for Carolina's trip up to Pittsburgh?
It's only fun and exciting if they win, because Pittsburgh's not a outstanding old ACC rival by any means, but it's not fun losing to them. It's not fun losing to them in that stadium, which is, of course, the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers, a NFL team that virtually everybody, unless you're Pittsburgh fans, you hate. And so, I think this was a game, I think, that when we were going through the schedule back in August, I think we all maybe penciled in and said, yep, Carolina's at least a losable game. Maybe it wasn't a for sure loss, but it was a game you looked at, on the road. Pat Narduzzi, really good coach. We all thought Phil Dracovic was going to be a better quarterback than what he's been. so far at different times this year for the Panthers. And to me, this game looks very winnable for Carolina. And we talked on Tuesday. This is the most I've believed in a 3-0 start in my time as a Tar Heel fan, whether that was back during, the COVID year, back in, was it 2010 they started 3-0. This is a start that I look at and say, okay, you can actually do some things with this and put yourself in a position, especially depending on what happens tomorrow afternoon in Death Valley, to get back to Charlotte and get back to a chance to compete for an ACC championship. And so I think tomorrow, as much as any game so far Carolina's played this year, we're going to learn if this team and this program is ready to take that step Mac Brown preached all offseason long.
Yeah, I mean, good to great, I think, is definitely something that if you're making that transition, if you're really finding a way to take that next step, it's got to start with a game like this because, this Pittsburgh team is not the team that you have faced in the past. But look, Carolina's had their issues here recently with Pittsburgh. I mean, last year was the most convincing win that Carolina's had. Really, I mean, even when you go back to the Larry Fedora days, that was one of the more convincing wins that Carolina has had. But before that, Mac Brown was 0-2 against Pittsburgh. Now, both games were on the road at Pittsburgh. The 2020 matchup, which was supposed to happen originally on the original schedule, was canceled and was not a part of their 2020 schedule that they got during COVID. So they ended up having to play back-to-back times on the road there. I will say this, you go back to 2019, that was the team for Pittsburgh that made it to a New Year's Six Bowl with Kenny Pickett. That was a team that was pretty legitimate. Carolina ends up getting beat by them in overtime. They fought very hard. And then you'll remember the last one was really just one of the oddest weather games that you'll ever see. Beautiful night the entire way. We get to overtime. Pittsburgh has their possession. They score. And then Carolina comes out for their possession and just monsooning rain. Carolina can't do anything to move the football, and they end up losing that game in overtime as well. So Carolina's been very close. Don't get it wrong. They've had their opportunities. They probably should have closed both of those games out in regulation, but they weren't able to do it. The paranoia doesn't stop there, though, for Tar Heel fans, because Carolina on Thursday, they always do the uniform reveal. And yesterday, when they revealed the uniforms, Carolina is going to go with the all-white Stormtrooper look. Now, normally, you would say, look, it's a uniform, right? How much really goes into that? Well, Carolina, wearing these uniforms under Mac Brown, they are 0-4 in this jersey, including the last time they wore these was in Atlanta back in 2021 when they got beat 45-22 by a Georgia Tech team that had no business beating them, let alone blowing them out. So a lot of people are wondering, is there something about wearing these jerseys? I mean, I would hope, the thing I hope that the team is doing right now is that they are blocking all of this out. The point that you mentioned as well, Carolina, I mean, they're going to be focused because it's game day. They do not need to be worried about what is happening in Death Valley. If Clemson gets beat, that should be the least of your worries. You need to take care of your own business in this game. So I think, there's a lot of different things that go into this game, a lot of different reasons why Tar Heel fans are a little bit paranoid. But I feel like this is a Pittsburgh team that, Tar Heel fans should look at and say, okay, this is a gettable opponent. And I think the Tar Heels themselves should look at this group and say, we match up pretty well with this team. We should be able to have some success against them. Pittsburgh so far this season, they're 1-2. Their one win comes against Wofford. The two losses against Power 5 opponents in Cincinnati and West Virginia. Offensively, averaging just 24 points per game, 321.3 yards of total offense. 178 of those come through the air, 143.3 of those on the ground. Josh mentioned Phil Jurkovec has not been great at all, the transfer from Boston College. And look, this is probably shouldn't shock anybody because I mean, look at how much success they had with transfer quarterbacks coming in and succeeding. For them, this was their third straight transfer quarterback. At some point, it was just not going to work for them. And look, Jurkovec could come out. He played very well when Carolina faced him back in that 2020 season when they played up at Boston College. But this is a guy that's just not feeling it right now. His last 2 games, he is completing less than 35% of his passes. He has under 300 passing yards during that stretch. He did throw 3 touchdowns against Cincinnati, but followed that up with a 0 touchdown, 3 interception performance against West Virginia, where he actually threw 66 yards worth of interceptions. That was more passing yards to West Virginia players than the West Virginia quarterbacks had to the receivers the other night in that game. So just a brutal all-around performance for him. They are sticking with him at quarterback. Carolina has to be prepared. There could be a chance that they end up going to their backup, although Christian Velo is not a guy that I think is going to scare you with his legs. It's not going to be a completely different style that's going to be coming into the game. But we know how Carolina is with handling those types of changes. The pass catchers, not nearly as potent as they've been in the years past. We've seen some guys that have been very explosive, especially on the outside. They don't really have that guy. Bub Means is the guy that they've been trying to turn into their deep threat all year long. Guys, they've targeted him 18 times. 4 of those have been completed so far this season. So it just has not been there the majority of the year. Carolina's still got to take care of that, though. But the guys they have to watch, tight end Gavin Bartholomew. This will be the first time Carolina will really face a good tight end unit so far this year. That's been something that has bothered Carolina in the past. I know, South Carolina, Trey Knox was a guy that was very highly thought of. He didn't really do much in that first game. This is a guy, though, in Gavin Bartholomew, who is a little bit more involved than even Trey Knox was with the offense that he was previously in at Arkansas before he came to South Carolina. So we'll see how Carolina, schemes to take him away after he did some good things against the Tar Heels last year. And then Keonta Mumfield is another guy that Carolina has to be aware of in the slot. Offensive line, the strength of this unit, again, has been for a while. But there is a question mark that they have at right guard where they've had 3 different players play 50 or more snaps already. So that's an area that could be a little bit of a weakness. Hopefully Carolina's interior defensive line can take advantage of that. The running game, they always have a pretty solid running game. This year, not nearly as good as it's been in the past, but they do rotate 3 different guys back there: Rodney Hampton Jr., Sebo Flemster, and Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter was the most productive of these guys in a game this season, and with just 65 yards rushing. And that really shows you where they're at. They're averaging just 4.4 yards per carry, which is not great at all. Hammond Jr., who is their leading rusher, is averaging less than 4 per game. So this is a group that, shouldn't instill near the amount of fear that some of the past running back groups have at Pittsburgh. Defensively, now this is a scary group. And again, I think some of these stats may be skewed by the teams that they played so far this year. But look, they've allowed 17 points per game so far this year, which is just outside the top 40 nationally. Just 236 yards of total offense, 114 passing yards so far in the first 3 games, and then 122 rushing yards per game. The secondary, interestingly enough, might be the strength of this unit. The big thing with this team in the past was that their secondary was always something that teams picked on, especially, you go back to the Larry Fedora era. That was where Carolina won the majority of those games, was just through the air. This secondary looks like it might be a good bit better. It all starts with Donovan McMillan and Javon McIntyre, who form one of the better safety duos in the entire conference. But as a whole, the unit has been great. No one has allowed more than 79 yards in coverage through the first 3 games of the season. So really shows you that they are doing a great job of shutting guys down Carolina is going to have to find a way to get open, something that teams have not been very successful doing so far this year. The running game is they are allowing more yards on the ground than through the air, but still really strong group. The linebacker trio of Solomon DeShields, Bengali Kamara, and Brandon George, very, very solid. The defensive front, usually always the strength. Doesn't have the stars like it does in the past, but has still been pretty productive so far. They rotate a lot of different guys up there, so Carolina is going to have to be prepared. This is somewhat similar. I feel like a lot of people think this is somewhat similar to what we saw from Minnesota last week. A really good defense statistically on paper, but how good are the teams that they have faced? I mean, West Virginia, the team they faced last week, is just horrid offensively themselves. They lost their starting quarterback in that game. Cincinnati is not the Desmond Ridder Cincinnati. Luke Fickell is actually probably the Cincinnati that I should be going with there. Since he departed, Scott Satterfield didn't have those boys humming nearly the way that their former coach did. So what do you make of this Pittsburgh team that Carolina will be facing when they step on the field tomorrow night in primetime?
I mean, defensively, it's vintage Pat Narduzzi. And this is what, he made his reputation as the defensive coordinator for Michigan State under Mark D'Antonio all those years in East Lansing. And whenever Pittsburgh's really good under him, it's because they've got a good defense. I know Kenny Pickett 2 years ago took them to a conference championship in a New Year's Six bowl game, and they've made another ACC title game appearance before that as well. But this is going to be what really keeps them in the game, because if Carolina comes out and spots a quick 14 points, I think that's going to be a lot what you saw last week with Minnesota. They're not a team that's built to play from behind. But if Pittsburgh can make the game ugly and muddy, and I don't know if weather is going to play a role in tomorrow night's game. I know you got that tropical storm that is supposed to impact the Mets and Phillies series tomorrow afternoon at 4:00. If weather does show up and plays a factor, unless Carolina returns to the team we saw 2 weeks ago where they ran the ball at will, it's going to be really hard, I think, for Pittsburgh if Carolina comes out and gets points early to really come from behind. They're just not built for it. This is a team that is going to want to play the same way like Minnesota did last week, where they're going to want to try to shorten the game, limit possessions, keep Drake May and that offense on the sideline. But on the flip side, if Carolina gets off to that faster start, it really gives them a chance to control the game. And I think that's something I'm really looking to see Carolina do this week, is that, if this team is taking that next step and they're going from good to great, good teams could win the game. Great teams could dominate or control the game from start to finish. And I think that's going to be, kind of on, what I'm going to be looking for tomorrow night is what Carolina do we get? Do we get the team that wants to start fast that you saw against South Carolina, that you saw against Minnesota, or with this being the first road game of the year, albeit it's not like there's a great environment up there at Acrisure Stadium, is this going to be a game that Carolina has to settle into when they find themselves in a dogfight deep into the second half? And so that's why I said this. To me, this game is just as intriguing as any other game Carolina's played so far this year. I don't think Pitt's as good as Minnesota. I don't know if they're as good as South Carolina, to be as frank with you, but they're going to pose a challenge just in a different way for this Tar Heel team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's them and Minnesota are very, very similar. I mean, you look at the areas of weakness. I mean, their passing game, that's where Minnesota struggled. I will say this. I think Minnesota, as of right now, out of the gate, is a better running team than them. And look, maybe Cincinnati and West Virginia just have great run defenses that we just don't know enough about. But, I mean, yeah, this is not a team that poses the offensive threat. I mean, in years past, especially under Kenny Pickett, I mean, that offense, Carolina had trouble stopping them at times. Even last year, Israel Abanikanda came in there. He had a really good game. And Carolina, you talk about a game that Carolina was able to control. They did that even last year, and that was a better offensive team. So you're right. And that's where I think, we start with our Tar Heel storylines. Going from good to great, as they talked about so much in the offseason, I think you're right. It's about controlling this game. Dominating, I think, would be outstanding. If you could come into this game and blow them out, that would be fantastic. But I think at this point, that's the one thing that I still have to see from this team before I can say that they're going to actually be able to do it, because we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that we have seen them control games. And I said this when we recapped the game the other night on Tuesday. I think the difference that you're seeing from this team as opposed to teams that in the past couple of years, I think you're seeing a Tar Heel team that in games that they're not able to put opponents away early, which they've had those so far out of the gate this season, you're still seeing them win games by double digits. It's not like these are complete nail biters down to the end. And I'm hoping that this is going to be one of those types of games. This should not be a game where it comes down to, the final snap of the game. I would hope not. I mean, I get it. It's on the road. And at this point, you're going to take wins any way you can get them. Yep. But at the same time, I feel like this should be one of those games where Carolina comes out, against a team that is struggling offensively. You're not struggling offensively. I mean, I know there are concerns about Drake May and the turnovers, but other than that, I think your offense is moving the ball extremely efficiently. You're scoring in the red zone. You're doing exactly what you have to do so far early in the year to lead yourself to victory. I feel like this is one of those games where you should be able to come out, get off to a pretty quick start, somewhat similar to what you saw last week, and then just control the game the rest of the way. I think it's going to be important. Now, I think one of the questions that I have coming into this game is, we've seen 3 different ways of winning games so far for Carolina. First game of the year against South Carolina, dominant defensive performance. I mean, you are not going to see a performance like that probably any time in the near future. So that's one we'll be looking back on for a while. And then, you go to the App State game. We're kind of wondering, okay, what does Carolina do? Offensively, they ran the ball pretty well in that first game of the year, but they leaned on big plays from the passing game and that defense. Well, in that game, you get gashed on the ground for over 200 yards, but your running game runs for over 300, and that's what carries you to the victory in that one. And then last week, we thought, okay, going up against a Minnesota team that got ran on for over 150 yards in the first game of the season. You thought that would be the area that Carolina would try to attack. Wasn't there early. Carolina goes and sort of changes up what they've been doing the entire season, turns into more of that air raid type offense that we've seen in the past, and finds a way to win the game, throwing for 414 yards in that one. So, I mean, the question now becomes, what element of this team is ready to step up in this game and potentially be what wins them this one? Because we've seen them, kind of change their identity each and every week. Do they lock into one of the identities that we've already seen, or is there another one that pops up in this game and ultimately is the difference in this one on the road to Pittsburgh?
That's a really good question, because I don't know if I have an answer for it. It's a road game. The answer probably needs to be the defensive line, just simply because they haven't been what they need to be the last 2 weeks. We talked about how great the secondary was last week. You can't ask any more of your linebackers than you do with Ced Gray and Power Eccles, as good a linebacking tandem as you're going to find in the conference. How about I'll go with outside receiver, because if there's a defensive coordinator or a defensive-minded coach that's going to lose sleep trying to find a way to take away Kobe Paysour or Nate McCollum, Pat Narduzzi's up on that list. He's not going to let his team get beat the way Minnesota got beat a week ago. And so if they're able to take one or both of those two guys away, you're going to need a J.J. Jones to make a play or two on the outside, and Andre Green Jr. make a play. Is Gavin Blackwell going to be good to play on Saturday? I didn't really see an injury report.
Questionable with an upper body injury, but I mean, it's pretty
chances
obvious.
are he's not going to play on Saturday.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, very possible.
Yeah,
There's also the mystery guy. Who else could possibly be out on the offensive side of the ball? There's at least one or two every single week now. So you got that element going.
And now we're just projecting injuries.
It's unbelievable. Like last week, you go in, you're feeling good. Willie Lampkin shows up on the injury report, doesn't end up playing. Ryan Coe, even before we had gotten to the stadium, I mean, absolutely nothing that would tell you that he was injured. Doesn't play in the game. Now, I guess technically that's special teams, but still, like every week we've seen it. McCullum week 1, British Brooks week 2. I mean, it's just – so, I mean, Carolina, I guess you're just preparing for it at this point. Clearly, I mean, they're going to have better knowledge going into the game if there is a situation like that. But, that is pretty interesting because I really think – and that's another one of the storylines that I think – you got to talk about in this game is, the passing game, the success that they had last week. How do they build on that this week against a team that has done such a great job of taking away the passing games of the first 3 opponents that they played this year? Now, look, the first opponent that they played is Wofford. We saw Wofford a few years ago. That is that's no feat that you're hanging up an award for. But look, I mean, Cincinnati is a team that, has been able to throw the football pretty successfully in the last few years. And then West Virginia have a game where you got a quarterback that got injured. But still, I mean, what they're doing cannot be downplayed. So Carolina, can they sort of counteract that? Because I will say this is far and away the best passing offense that Pitt will have faced so far this year. Very similar to what we saw last weekend with Minnesota. I mean, you said it when we were previewing the game. Who has Minnesota really played? This is going to be their first real test. I feel like you're probably setting up for a similar circumstance with Pittsburgh, but I do feel like this is probably a more talented defensive back room. It's definitely a more veteran defensive back room. I'm with you. I think, they're going to watch the film from the game against Minnesota. They're going to see, look, man, Nate McCullum was a huge focus for Drake May. These tight ends are a huge focus for Drake May. Let's try to find a way to make anybody but the guys that are in the slot or playing in line beat us. And I wonder if there are guys that can step up on the outside. I mean, J.J. Jones has had big catches in each of the last 2 weeks. You're hoping that he can sort of become a little more consistent. But with Gavin Blackwell possibly out, you need one, Kobe Paysour, who moved to the outside. And we talked about it on Tuesday. I don't know how much I like the fact that they're going to use him now almost exclusively on the outside. I get wanting to use him a little bit out there so you can get him on the field as much as possible with Nate McCullum out there as well. But I think there are going to be times where you got to use him in the slot. But if you're going to do that, then that means that you're going to need Andre Green Jr. to step up and start playing a much bigger role, or one of the true freshmen is finally going to get an opportunity for themselves, either Christian Hamilton or Chris Culliver. So somebody's going to have to be ready to step up in this game. And I really wonder, could this be Andre Green Jr.'s breakout game? We saw the flash that he had in the bowl game, 3 catches, 24 yards, but had that impressive touchdown. Could this finally be where he sort of breaks out? I think he might have to if Carolina is going to win this game. Now, you mentioned another area that Carolina was really good a week ago, and an area they're going to hope to, sort of build off of that performance against another passing offense that is struggling, is this pass defense. I think, a lot of credit needs to be given to the secondary because, as you mentioned, they had their worst performance in terms of pass rush a week ago. That was the fewest pressures that they've had all season long, just 13 in the entire game. So definitely not the type of performance that you want to see from your defensive front or that you've seen for the majority of the season. And the thing that, was discouraging about last week, they got more pressure against App State when the game plan was very clear from App State to try to get the ball out quickly. That was not Minnesota's game plan really at all. They had moments where they did that, but Minnesota, there were so many times where their quarterback held onto the football, was trying to find something. It was just, it's just this simple. Their quarterback was just terrible. There's no way around it. He had a horrible performance in that game. He was definitely off target on some throws, but I also thought that Carolina was really, really good in coverage. I thought, when you have 8 pass breakups in a game, you're clearly doing something right. They pull down 2 interceptions, one of them by a linebacker, Power Eccles, who makes a diving grab for his interception because apparently that's the only way he can intercept footballs. But I really thought that you saw some really good stuff out of Armani Chapman. One, they may have a guy there that can help them out on the outside. I think you're still seeing, Elijah Huzzy continue to grow into his role. He looks really, really good, consistent in coverage. I thought last week was his best performance. Can he build off of that? And then your guy, Marcus Allen, I think he has been fantastic really this entire season. So to me, I think that's one of the big storylines in this game against a team in Pittsburgh that's struggling the way they are. Can this pass defense, mainly this secondary, continue to take a step forward and show people that last year, all those yards that were given up was really just because they didn't have the right guys in that room.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, the more that you come out, you shut down another passing offense this week. And look, the stats are going to say that they're not a good throwing team, which is accurate. More importantly, what it's doing is it's building confidence within that back room, something that I don't think has existed probably since the COVID year. And that was with young guys that were playing more off of instinct than they were of what they're being taught. And that goes a long way. Because that's what, you look at that 2015 pass defense, and there were some talented dudes in there. But more importantly, they just believed that they were going to make the plays that they had to make without a dominant pass rush, without, they didn't have the linebacking play that Carolina has now with Eccles and Gray. Mm-hmm. And so another chance to really take a step forward. I think Elijah Huzzy continues to prove why they brought him in. Every time I watch him, I become more of a believer in what he's doing. I got the man crush on Marcus Allen just because I see the ability there to do stuff at a high level. You look at what Armani Chapman did last week. You can't deny what he did. He was making plays all over the field. Gio Biggers, if he didn't commit a stupid penalty last week, it would have been almost a perfect game for that secondary unit. And the thing about it is I don't think they're going to want to rest and rest on their laurels or what they did last week. Last week was last week. This week is this week. It's on to a new challenge. And the part of going from good to great is building off of what you did good a week ago. And there's no reason why, if they have to, they can't make plays that determine the outcome of this game, because you got a questionable dude at quarterback. And the last time I checked, they don't have a Blitnikoff winner, on the sideline. Jordan Addison ain't out there running routes. And so I really like, whether the defensive line, brings their jockstrap or not this week, I really like this secondary's chances to compete at a high level once again.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned, one of the guys that I think has to be shouted out. I think both safeties have to be shouted out. Both guys have taken steps forward this year. They were both guys that it would have been very easy to just completely give up on and say, look, these guys are not the solution back there. I was incredibly concerned about those two guys back there before we started the season. Because, you saw last year there was just inconsistencies all over the place. Don Chapman, he didn't even start until late in the season. He was a guy that the staff, was looking at as a rotational guy. I mean, hell, even this offseason, you almost lost him to the transfer portal at one point. But he comes back, and I think him and Gio Bigger so far this year have been fantastic back there, considering, what we saw from them a year ago. I still think, it's early in the season. You have to wait and see. But I really think those guys have stepped up back there. Will Hardy played much better the other day after he struggled in the game against App State the week before. So Carolina's really got a bunch of guys. That's the other thing. The depth in that secondary is just phenomenal. And you said about the defensive line bringing their jockstrap. Well, I think that's look. They've got to jock up. All right, they got to do something this week because they got to be better at slowing down the running game. We just talked about how bad Pittsburgh's passing game has been so far this year, how good your secondary has been so far this year. Why wouldn't you want that to be the way that your defense is able to beat this Pittsburgh team, is by forcing them to have to throw the football against these guys and trusting them to be able to make the plays for you. Well, right now the problem is that the run defense, first game of the year, Carolina put up one of their best run defensive performances I've seen since I've been watching football. I mean, this was video game-esque type stuff. They allowed -2 rushing yards in this game. Now, it's weird because in college football, sacks do count against your rushing yardage as opposed to the NFL. They do it a different way. There's a specific category that it goes into or whatever. But still, for you to be as dominant as you were, you allowed 19 yards rushing to Dakereon Joyner, the starting running back for South Carolina. Well, since then, and I get it, man, App State is a much better running team than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Nate Noel, he's going to run for over 1,000 yards this season. He is. I mean, he's just been fantastic. He kicked ECU's ass last weekend as well. I really do think that, Carolina. Okay, are you back? What happened?
Yeah, no, I'm back.
Okay, I didn't know what happened. I was waxing poetic about the run defensive struggles, and I thought this would be the time where you wanted to tee off. But yeah, I mean, I just think that for Carolina, you face two really good running games. I get that this running game isn't exactly playing at the highest level right now, but it's still a group that has a lot of talent. It's still a group that's capable of running the football on you if you're not ready. I really do think that for Carolina, one of the things I'm watching in this game is, can this run defense step up? And it all starts up front with being able to seal the edge better. And you need those interior defensive linemen to step up. I told you they got that rotating door right now at right guard. They've had 3 different guys that have played significant snaps there. Well, you need your interior defensive line to start taking advantage of stuff like that.
Yeah, this is a chance for this defensive line to get back on track and feel somewhat to what we thought we were going to get in week 1. And look, none of us are sitting here asking to give that type of production week in, week out. But the problem is, and we said this after the game, was that you put it on the tape. You proved that you were able of overwhelming an offensive line that has SEC caliber talent on it. And then the next week you go and you get pushed around by a Sunbelt squad, and that was disappointing. And then you mentioned you even get less pressures last week against Minnesota. And so Carolina's got to get back to at least being more consistent winning up front. This is not going to be a defensive line that you're gonna think is special. I mean, this isn't Clemson, this isn't Florida State. They don't got those types of dudes up front, which is why it's got to be a team effort. It's got to be everybody doing their assignments, doing what they're asked to do. Because when they do that, in Gene Shizik's scheme, the defense does what we're asking it to do, which is to not lose its games. And so I'd like for this to be a game where Kamen Rucker is a problem on the edge. I think Desmond Evans has played arguably the best 3 games in a row in his entire Tar Heel career, at least from a consistency standpoint. This is the most impact I've seen him make on a consistent basis at Carolina. Jahvaree Ritzie and Miles Murphy, I think those are dudes we're still waiting to see get going and get more involved. I want to see more Jacoby Cowan. It feels like he doesn't play a lot, but when he's in there, he's doing something or trying to do something. You're seeing more Travis Shaw. So I think the thing you like about it is they're not afraid to rotate dudes. They're looking to get that right mixture of what they had in week one because it hasn't been there really since week one. And this is a good chance for them to do it because this isn't a Pitt offensive line that's going to scare anybody by any means. And I would imagine Gene Chizik's looking at that right guard spot as a way to attack with his defensive line up front early and often.
Well, look, he's going to look at that also and then probably say, let's see how we can sort of blitz through that gap and everything like that. I wouldn't be shocked. But it's really, to me, I get the concerns when it comes to pass rush. And I feel like, last week, I think you got to give some credit to the tackles for Minnesota. We talked about that when we previewed that game. That was their strength coming in. Their tackles were really, really good. And I thought they showed that last week. Kamen Rucker and Des Evans were really productive in the first 2 games of the season. I will say this, though. Carolina didn't get a lot of pressure last week, but still, I thought the edge rushers, when they needed to get pressure, they stepped up and made plays. You talked about Jacoby Cowan. He was in on 7 snaps the entire day. 4 of those were pass rushing snaps. He got 2 pressures and the huge sack on 3rd and 2 that eventually led to Carolina getting the ball back and driving down and scoring. Des Evans, quieter day for him. He's the guy that gets the pressure on the interception by Armani Chapman that kills that drive. So that's the thing that you're seeing. I'm focused on the interior that's defensive line more than anything. Because I got to be honest, even in the first game of the season, I haven't seen anything from this group really. First game of the season, it was all about those dudes on the edge, man. They just absolutely killed South Carolina. And here's the thing. Maybe South Carolina's offensive line is just that bad. It's very possible. I know we didn't see it because we were at the stadium. I had multiple people that told me their offensive line was downright terrible in the second half against Georgia. But here's the thing. They were at least serviceable enough in that first half. So, it can't all be – I've heard multiple people say this. Well, maybe it was just all about how bad South Carolina was. It can't all be about that. You don't get 9 sacks and 16 tackles for loss just based on how bad one unit is. It's a cumulative effort. So I think, it's just about being more consistent up there. It's about that interior defensive line taking a step forward, and I certainly think they have the opportunity to do that this weekend. Well, now let's transition into our keys to the game and predictions for this game. We'll start with those keys. I think, going right back into it, I think it really starts with stopping the run. And we won't talk too much more about, what they need to do run defense wise. But I think it's really just about forcing this passing game of Pittsburgh to have to throw the football in this game. They're coming off a game where they threw for 81 yards, 3 interceptions. This is a passing offense that is not in rhythm at all. They don't have – they're very similar. I'm not going to say very similar to you because your offense is still way above them. You threw for 414 yards last week, but they don't have that over-the-top threat. Carolina's had the over-the-top threat. It just hasn't been there with one specific guy. They have had no over-the-top threat the whole season. They're really limited to what their tight end can do, what their slot receiver can do, and I think Carolina can take that away. So to me, if you can stop the run in this game, I think you will almost completely be able to take Pitt's offense out of this game. So that's my first key.
The best way to do it is you got to win on early downs. You got to realize that in this game, a 4-yard run on 1st and 10 is a positive play for Pittsburgh, which means 2nd and 6, they're going to run it again. But if you hold them to 2 yards or less and they're looking at 2nd and 8 or even 2nd and 7, those are more likely going to be passing type of downs, or they're going to at least have the option to probably throw it again as opposed to running it. And when Carolina's done that so far in the early year, they've done a much better job of getting off the field on third downs and getting the type of pressure that they got to get on the quarterback, because it's hard, man. Like in 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3s, I mean, unless you're just all out blitzing, it's hard to get to the quarterback even if they're throwing. And, Carolina hasn't – it's really hard at that point to figure out what they're going to do and how you're going to attack. And it's easier to attack a defense in 3rd and 2 because you can run it or you can throw it. And so if Carolina wins on early downs more often, it really lends to them abandoning the run early. And that's what Minnesota did last week. I mean, that was a team that wanted to come in there and run the ball and shorten the game, but they couldn't do it. They got behind 2 possessions and went, air Gopher. Well, what do you to make it Pittsburgh go air Panther on Saturday? And the best way to do that is win on first down.
Yeah, I mean, and Mac Brown has talked about that for years, winning on first. It's first and second down. You cannot let them get into 3rd and short situations. And we've seen that far too often. A lot of it they've done with that running game. So I think if you take this running game out of this one, unless they just have an unreal performance where they are just carving you up in the short passing game, which I think we saw last week. I don't know. I mean, I thought Carolina was much more aggressive with their coverages last week. I think that's something that, Mac Brown called it out in the press conference after App State, and I think it was something they adjusted last week. I think it'll still be there this week because they had so much success with it. I really do think that if you stop this running game, it's going to be hard pressed to see a way that Pittsburgh's offense just comes out and moves the football on you. Second key to the game for Carolina in this one, to me, is win in the trenches. And I really think, it focuses a lot on the defensive side of the ball, but the offensive side of the ball, they got to be better than they were a week ago. Now, the hope is that they have Willie Lampkin back for this game. That loss last week cannot be understated enough. He was Carolina's best offensive lineman in the first 2 games of the season. And it frankly wasn't even close. Now I will say this: you really got to give it to Carolina for how they pass protected a week ago. I mean, allowing 7 total pressures in the entire game, and that was with a guy in Ed Montelis that was 1 coming back from injury, and 2, frankly, has not been that great in that area to begin with. William Barnes, Spencer Rowland really stepped up last week and played well in pass protection areas where they've struggled at times in their career. I think if you have a similar type of performance in this game and, couple that with the opportunity to get Willie Lampkin back, you should be able to run the ball a little bit better. I know Pittsburgh's been really good against the run so far this year, so that will be, a tough task, but I think it is possible. And I think if they win up front on the offensive side of the ball, they should be able to put up points in this game.
Yeah, I mean, ACC game on the road, teams that win up front usually win and control the ball game. As questionable as it may be, Pittsburgh is going to want to make Carolina have to throw the ball because they like their secondary probably a little more than Minnesota like their secondary. You also look at the fact that Drake's thrown 4 picks. They might think they could get him to force a turnover or 2 to really change the game. I think Carolina can win the game with Drake throwing for 350 or plus, but I think this offense is at its best when it's running and throwing. And this offensive line should be motivated after they put together last week. Because as good as Minnesota is up front, it was disheartening how Carolina could not really run the ball. They weren't able to move their guys off their spots. There was just never a time where I felt like they could run the ball after the first 2 weeks where they pretty much ran it whenever they wanted to. So that's going to need to change, especially, like I said, I don't know if the weather is going to play a factor in this game or not. I just gave you a weather report from what I got told listening to a Met game on my way home that a game in Philadelphia is going to potentially be moved by the weather. if this turns into a rain type game, whichever offensive line wins is going to probably win the game. Remember, because that's what really happened when they lost in overtime a few years ago when the bottom fell out. Yeah, Carolina had a procedural penalty at the 1 yard line, but then the heavens opened up, and Carolina's offensive line just let the Pitt's defensive line come through like they had nothing to say about it. So it's going to be imperative that Carolina wins up front early and often.
The weather, by the way, should not affect this game.
No, that's good.
Now, what you're referring to is Tropical Storm Ophelia, which is just off the coast of North Carolina at this point. If this game was in Chapel Hill, we would be talking about a ton of rain, a lot of wind. That would definitely affect the game. Now, you mentioned, we're New York Mets fans, so they're playing in Philadelphia right now. The reason that game will be affected is because of how far east Philadelphia is. Pittsburgh is so far west in the state that they're not going to really get any sort of effects from this.
That is right. I got my cities in that state that I hate mixed up.
Well, there you go. Yeah. No, I mean they are pretty far apart from each other. So I mean I've seen it, like it's going to be cloudy. There might be a little bit of wind, but I don't think there's going to be any significant changes. I think Carolina will be fine in this game to run their normal game plan. So I think that's something that you can take off the table. You don't have to worry about that. So yeah, I think they'll be fine there. That will not be one of our keys to the game. My last key to the game here, though, is, and I mentioned it earlier in passing, Carolina, this is one of those games that, because of where Pittsburgh is at right now, I get such a similar feeling from them that I got from that Minnesota team that we saw last weekend. And I feel like this is one of those opponents that Carolina, they should be able to control the game against. In order to do that, you have to get off to a good start early, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. You've got to get some points on the board. I think that's going to be imperative for Carolina in this game, is to come out, set the tone early, score some points. I mean, you'd like to combine it with, a good job by your defense to get off the field. I think if you can get out to, a 2-possession lead early, whether it's 10-0, would of course prefer 14-0. If you can get up 2 possessions early in this game, either, late first quarter, early second quarter, I think that could be what allows you to gain that control of the game, have a little bit of comfort. And I think that's the position that Carolina wants to be in this one. There'll be ones later in the season where you'll be all right with being in battles because you're going up against more talented teams. This is one of those teams that right now I think you are clearly the better team. You should be able to control this game. And in order to do that, you have to find a way to start quick.
Yeah, and the best way to do it is not turn the ball over. And I'll just kind of piggyback off of that with yours. This needs to be a clean game from Drake. If he comes out and has another multi-turnover game, we're going to have a conversation about the turnovers, because that'd be 3 of the 4. And you go back to some of the turnover struggles he had last year to close out the regular season, and then into the postseason play. The thing is the ones last week were, I'm not going to say they were forgivable because your defense only gave up 3 points, but you can't bank on that happening every game, every time, or if you turn the ball over twice. You look at the 2 against South Carolina, the one decision to throw back across his body, everybody and their mother knew that ball was getting picked. The other one, the catch has to be made, or else that doesn't happen. And so, but you're right. I think if Carolina, you're always trying to score points, right? But we always talk about the whole chasing points thing. I think if Carolina comes out and puts together 2 touchdown drives right off the bat early in the game and makes it a 2-possession game, I don't see Pittsburgh crawling back in this game. But if Drake May comes out and gives them 1 or 2 short fields and breathes some life and some confidence into that offense, into that defense, they could be in for more of a battle than what they probably should be going into tomorrow.
All right, well, it is prediction time. As always, I will let you start. What do you see happening in Acrisure Stadium tomorrow night at 8 o'clock?
I can't remember if this was – I know you had this as a loss back when we went through the schedule. I can't remember what I had it going for Carolina.
I think you had it as a win because you had them going 9-3 and you had them – no, maybe you did have it as a loss because you didn't have them losing the opener. So maybe you did.
I think this was a loss on my end, but that was a month ago. And I had questions about Carolina that haven't been fully answered, but have been semi-answered. And I thought Pitt was going to be better. And we were at Media Day. There were a lot of people that thought Pitt could be a sneaky team to watch in this conference because nobody was talking about them. A lot of hype for Clemson, Florida State, Carolina, Duke. Maybe even NC State, depending on if you ask the right person. This wouldn't be Georgia Tech level loss if Carolina loses this game. But if Carolina loses, it'll be hard pressed to believe this team's going to have the type of year we want them to have and what you're hoping to have with Drake May. It's also the day before my birthday, and I don't want to be miserable on my birthday. I got the Heels on the road, 31-17.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. I did have this as a loss on the schedule, and I thought it was very similar to, I really did think this was going to be one of those games. Like, I thought Pittsburgh was going to be much better by this point. I really thought that running game-wise, they would have more answers than they have now. And I did not think their quarterback play would be this bad. I mean, to me, there is absolutely no question. This is a game that Carolina – I mean, I'm not going to say they have to win it. If they lose this game, the season is not over by any stretch. But this is one that you really want. Like, I mentioned it earlier. It's been 26 years since you started a season 4-0. I don't know if you've had a better chance than you are going to have in this one. I mean, we'd have to go back and look at all the different seasons. But I'm going to tell you, this team that's coming in here is incredibly vulnerable. They just got embarrassed in their rivalry game this past weekend against West Virginia. They're good team, good defensive team. But I think, like I said, there are so many similarities to that Minnesota team that you played a week ago. I think that's the game plan that you have to go off of. I do think this team learned from what they saw from Minnesota last week. I think this offensive line will do a much better job run blocking in this game. I think Carolina will be able to run the ball a little bit better. I think Drake May will be even more efficient. That's the thing that's so frustrating. Last week, the 2 interceptions, those were the only blemishes. Outside of that, he was fantastic. And I think that, he's going to have a chance to put up another game like that in this one. I don't know if he's going to throw for as many yards. I think Pittsburgh's secondary is pretty legitimate, but I think he is going to come out, have a successful day through the air. I think Carolina's offense moves the ball pretty well throughout the day. But I still think it could be one of those games that ends up being a little bit uglier maybe than some people expect. I think Carolina still pretty efficient offensively. I like Carolina's defense to come out and put together another really solid performance. I like the Tar Heels in this one. I think they score a late touchdown that really completes the separation in this one. I like them 34-13 on the road against the Pitt Panthers. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. I'll have the preview up there in the morning for you guys, as we have been doing here for these 8 o'clock kicks. That'll give you something to read in the morning. And also give us at least some sort of hope that maybe we find out something early in the morning if there is one of those surprise injuries that pops up for you guys. So I'll have that up there for you in the morning to get you going. And then after the game is over, we will, it's going to be a late game. So it just makes sense for us to wait until the next day to post the recap. That'll be up there for you guys on Sunday. We'll then have the stock report for you as we always do, and then circle back around and not do it all again. I'm actually blanking there for just a second. We will then have a bye week early. I know it's very weird. Carolina's had a lot of mid-season bye weeks here recently, which has always worked out pretty well for when I do the mid-season grades. I will not be doing those that early this year. I know it'll be 4 games in. We'll still have a pretty good sample size, but I do like to hold off. I'll do them at the true midpoint of the regular season for Carolina. So we will have, some sort of content up there for you guys that we're going through to keep you guys entertained while Carolina is going through their bye. So all that stuff will be up there on the website for you guys to check out. And who knows, there may also be, or there will definitely be, I know on Tuesday of this week, there will be some very interesting basketball stuff going up because the conference schedule is officially released. They're doing a release show on that night. Josh will have you covered. We'll, of course, be back on the Four Corners podcast breaking that down as well. So a bunch of stuff to look forward to on the basketball side of things as we get closer and closer to the start of basketball season in Chapel Hill as well. So once again, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Wish him a happy birthday. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.